Can you believe that the government has denied the space drug factory re-entry to this planet, but they're allowing corn that is going to destroy your semen? Hello fellow introverts and welcome back to the channel. Yeah, you heard it right. Today we're talking about a space drug factory that has, get this, been denied entry back into Earth. Now, apparently there's this company called Varda Space, right? And they are in the market, as it were, to construct pharmaceuticals, but they thought that, hey, California is such a shithole, we'd be better off doing it in space. So, this is their story. After manufacturing crystals of an HIV drug in space, the first orbital factory is stuck in orbit after being denied re-entry back to Earth due to quote-unquote safety concerns. After manufacturing crystals of an HIV drug in space, the first orbital factory is stuck in orbit after being denied re-entry back to Earth due to safety concerns. The U.S. Air Force denied a request from Varda Space Industries to land its in-space manufacturing capsule at a Utah training area, while the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, did not grant the company permission to re-enter Earth's atmosphere, leaving the spacecraft hanging as the company scrambles to find a solution. A spokesperson from the FAA emailed a statement saying the company's request was not granted at this time due to an overall safety risk and impact analysis. Gizmodo reached out to Varda Space to ask which regulatory requirements have not been met. The company responded with a two-word email that ominously read, "No comment." The California startup did provide an update on a spacecraft through Twitter, quote, "We are pleased to report that our spacecraft is healthy across all systems. It was originally designed for a full year in orbit if needed," Varda Space wrote on Twitter. "We are looking forward to continuing to collaborate with our government partners to bring the capsule back to Earth as soon as possible." Now, Varda Space launched a spacecraft on board the Falcon 9 rocket on June 12th. The 264-pound capsule is designed to manufacture products in a microgravity environment and transport them back to Earth. On June 30th, its first drug manufacturing experiment succeeded in growing crystals of the drug ritonavir, which is used for the treatment of HIV. In orbit, the microgravity environment provides some benefits that could make for better production in space, overall reducing gravity-induced defects. Protein crystals made in space form larger and more perfect crystals than those created on Earth, according to NASA. Quote, "Space drugs have finished cooking, baby!" Varda's co-founder wrote on Twitter. "Unfortunately, the space drugs are not allowed to come back to Earth." Varda's capsule was originally scheduled for re-entry on September 5th or the 7th, but not the 6th. But the company's application was denied on September 6th. See, I told you. Varda formally requested that the FAA reconsider its decision on September 8th, and their request is still pending. It's a very different type of re-entry capsule. If you think about it, both Dragon and Starliner, these are SpaceX vehicles that are $100 million plus minimum to build and $1 billion plus total programs. These are meant to carry humans, have active control, fully pressurized environments. We are effectively the polar opposite type of re-entry vehicle. If those are luxurious limousines, we're building like a 1986 Toyota Corolla that is meant to be less than $1 million a pop, quickly refurbished and shot right back out into space. Varda's in-space manufacturing capsule is a byproduct of the growing space industry, which grants easier access to low Earth orbit. The current regulatory debacle is also a result of the young space industry, one in which proper regulation of spacecraft is still taking shape. Well, there you have it, guys. If you were hoping to get your drugs from outer space, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. Now, you heard it right. This is a two-parter. Lucky you. The second part, now that we're so disappointed that we can't get our drugs from space, is how corn, not just any corn, but genetically modified corn, is set to stop specifically men from spreading his seed. Now, according to this, scientists have created the ultimate genetically modified crop, contraceptive corn. Waving fields of maize may one day prevent you from having as many kids as you would like, or any at all. These pregnancy prevention plants are the handiwork of San Diego biotech company Epicite, where researchers have discovered a rare class of human antibodies that attack sperm. Of course, the shit would come from California. By isolating the genes that regulate the manufacture of these antibodies and then putting them into corn plants, the company has created tiny horticultural factories that make contraceptives. We have a hothouse filled with corn plants that make anti-sperm antibodies, said Epicite president and certified man-hater Mitch Hine. We also created corn plants that make antibodies against the herpes virus, so we should be able to make a plant-based jelly that not only prevents pregnancy but also blocks the spread of sexual disease. Contraceptive corn is based on research on a rare condition, immune infertility, in which a woman makes antibodies that attack sperm. Essentially, the antibodies are attracted to surface receptors on the sperm, said Hine. They latch on and make each sperm so heavy it cannot move forward. It just sits there and shakes about. Normally, biologists use bacteria to grow human proteins. However, Epicite decided to use corn because plants have cellular structures that are much more like those of humans, make it easier to manipulate. The company says it will not grow the maize near other crops. It says it plans to launch clinical trials of the corn in a few months. Now, that was the first article. That was the original article, and right under it was this one. This is basically a retort to that one saying, don't worry, everything's fine. Yes, we did it, but it's not going to affect anybody. I don't know about you, man, but I don't really trust anybody that throws around terms casually like, oh, I don't know, human population control. Maybe that's just me. Now, this one says, the largest, highest quality analysis of data ever conducted reveals that genetically modified corn has little impact on non-target insects and other organisms, especially compared to growing conventional corn. The study was published in the Environmental Evidence by the USDA Agricultural Research Service scientists and his Swiss colleagues. Biotech corn is corn that has been genetically modified so that it produces proteins from the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis to control corn borers, corn rootworms, and other major pests of corn. The first BT corn was approved in 1996, and critics have been suggesting that it also can destroy beneficial insects and other non-targeted organisms. One of the issues with assessments of possible non-target organisms damaged by BT corn has been that each study has limited in scope, environment, or size. The paper's 3 authors have made up for these shortfalls by systematically pulling together data from studies with 7 bibliographical databases. So, in a greenhouse tucked away in Indianapolis, flourishes corn, being engineered to provide the active ingredient in gels that fight herpes and kill sperm. On 27 acres of Kentucky farmland grows tobacco that someday may actually help fight cancer. And then a tiny northern California farming town of Live Oak, rice laced with disease-fighting antibiotics usually found in mother's milk sprouts on a 10-acre patty. It's called molecular farming, and it's blossoming at biotechnology startups across the country. The idea is to implant human genes into crops to grow disease-fighting proteins, which can then be extracted and turned into profitable drugs and therapies. Some companies trick crops into accepting human genes spliced into the plant's DNA. Seeking to produce a contraceptive, Epicite Pharmaceuticals Inc. is splicing into corn a genetic defect found in some women with the aims of making the plant generate a protein that kills sperm. Another company, Large Scale Biology Corp., sprays plant viruses injected with human genes onto tobacco plants. The resulting infections produce cancer-fighting human antibodies. Molecular farming offers an elementary yet revolutionary proposition. It seeks to grow, quote-unquote, human therapies in the field and crack the antibody drug market, which had $2 billion in sales last year and is expected to grow to $8 billion in years to come. Some biotech companies have been able to grow antibodies, disease-fighting proteins that protect the body, in labs and turn them into drugs. Proponents of molecular farming could significantly cut the cost of developing such substances, unless you try it in space, and then you're pretty much screwed. 10 genetically engineered antibody drugs are on the market today, all developed using mice. Among the best known is Herceptin, which is used in testing some breast cancers made by Genentech. It took Genentech, Novartis, and MedImmune and other companies decades of research and hundreds of millions of dollars to persuade the FDA that these drugs would not harm humans. All 10 are mass-produced in a state-of-the-art laboratory in huge vats called bioreactors. After the antibodies have been extracted from the mice, where they are manufactured. Typically, it takes 100 million to 500 million and up to 10 years to discover, develop, and deliver a single such drug. Except for... not gonna say it. Molecular farmers believe that they can get their drugs to market for as little as 50 million by using fields instead of bioreactors to grow the raw materials. And because less costly laboratory processes could be used to refine the useful proteins for use in medicines, we can inexpensively produce a huge number of higher quality plants to manufacture human proteins. Technological obstacles loom. Few of these plant-generated proteins have been tested in people. One of the furthest along, large-scale biology's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma test at Stanford University involves just 16 subjects and is in phase 1 testing, the first and the smallest of 3 human trials required by the FDA for any drug. Molecular farmers hope FDA approval with wider trials will be easier because the drugs don't involve another animal species, and so there is no danger to animal viruses infecting people. But they must not only persuade the FDA that their drugs are safe and effective, they must also show the Department of Agriculture that their transgenic crops aren't likely to contaminate the food supply. The production of pharmaceutical compounds in crops is intriguing and possibly lucrative in the long run. It does take many years of research and a long regulatory process involving the FDA and the USDA to get the products out. Both agencies began meeting last summer to draw up guidelines to better regulate biotechnology farming. Nothing formal has been proposed currently, and a USDA permit is required to grow transgenic plants outdoors, and the crops must be isolated from fields to produce food. Activists who reject genetically modified food as unsafe because it is not fully understood, they say, will be watching closely, determined to keep up the pressure for strict safety standards. In September, Greenpeace protests donned biohazard suits and carried 10-foot-tall syringes in front of farms growing rice at Applied Photologics Inc., which is experimenting in growing human proteins found in mother's milk. The company's USDA-approved buffer zone was a 4-foot row of traditional rice. The chief executive officer, Frank Hagee, said the experiment wouldn't harm humans, plants, or animals, but Greenpeace said the impact of the transgenic rice hadn't been studied and contamination couldn't be ruled out. There are environmental concerns as well as unknown consequences, they claim. All these companies insist their technologies are safe, and they've taken every security measure possible. Large-scale biology sprays its tobacco crop in Kentucky with the tobacco mosaic virus, which can't be transmitted by pollen, insects, or seeds, so they say. Protegene and other companies said they control their bioengineered crops through every step of the process, from seed to harvest to disposal and field cleanup. We have a very tight program, they assure people, but Merrill points to the Starlink debacle last year as evidence that corporate security measures and promises don't always work. Starlink, a genetically engineered corn, won government approval as animal feed, but not for human consumption. Though Starlink was grown on less than 1% of the U.S. corn acreage, it was thought to be tightly regulated. It nonetheless cross-pollinated, widely contaminating 430 million bushels of corn and triggering a nationwide recall of taco shells, corn chips, and other foods. Could you imagine if sperm-killing corn got loose in an environment like that? Yes. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? Now, I am not one to jump to conspiracy theories, but it seems really weird that there's a certain individual out there who seems to be wanting to play God and thinking that he knows better than everybody. It just so coincidentally happens that he's in league and he bankrolls a lot of the major pharmaceutical companies, and he has been interested in agriculture recently. Interesting. But that's all I'm going to say about that. So, tell me what you think, nerds. Are we in for it? Are we supposed to be afraid of corn? I mean, I don't know. It seems like space-grown drugs is the least of our worries nowadays. But, let me know what you think. And with that, I will talk to you nerds later.